In his midterm budget policy statement, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana unveiled the government's plan to streamline its workforce by encouraging early retirements among public servants. Now, during a parliamentary response, the minister emphasized that the program will not be a free-for-all and will carefully safeguard critical skills within government. The South African Federation of Trade Unions has rejected the plan to implement early retirement initiatives for public servants, saying it's a cost-cutting measure that threatens service delivery and jeopardizes the livelihoods of thousands of working-class families. We're now joined by SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi. Good morning. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika.
Good morning, Master Chaba, and good morning to all of your colleagues and the people who are watching your program.
Now, let's start here. How would you describe the government's early retirement plan?
Irresponsible, careless, cold, totally removed from the realities facing our people in the hospitals that are known to be understaffed, have massive infrastructure backlogs, totally removed from the fact that we don't have enough police in our streets. According to the commissioners of the police, we needed 60,000 men and women in the streets to fight and to combat crime in our country. Removed totally from the reality that we are reversing the national norms in the education. The national norms and standards introduced by the minister were saying that we must go towards at least having one educator for every 30 kids in a classroom. We are going back from that. In some cases, we now back to 50, and there's a school in the Eastern Cape that had 104 kids for one educator. Totally removed from the fact that some of our prisons have up to 148% overcrowding rate. And we have stopped being correctional services centers where we transform even the hardcore criminals into people that can serve their communities when they have served their term in prison. And this is totally an irresponsible program that is only meant to basically dance to the tune of the IMF and the rating agencies in particular, who seem to be giving conditional funding to South African government to introduce its own what we call normal structural adjustment programs implemented by the World Bank elsewhere in the African continent. In this particular case, the government is totally ignoring the reality on the ground that we need more public servants. You know that in the Home Affairs Department alone, they themselves are saying they are only operating with 37% of the staff required. Hence, you have the crisis of what they call the porous borders and the crisis of thousands and thousands of unaccounted, undocumented people in the country, because our Home Affairs is not only corrupted, but it is also so understaffed, totally removed from the reality that there are 40,000 vacancies in the healthcare. And that's why when you go to the public hospital, you spend 8 hours in a queue waiting for Panado. And so these guys who have contracted themselves out in their families and who no longer using the public services, who have bodyguards, who have high security walls, who totally are far removed from the incidents of crime where working class people must endure a reality that criminals can walk in and out of their properties at will. They don't care about all of that. Their kids are in the private schools, and they basically are out of the public service themselves. And that's why SAFTU has been amongst those organizations calling on the cabinet ministers to use the public services themselves so that they can feel the pain that the public is feeling. So now to say, in addition to all of the crises that we're trying to articulate now in a few minutes, we must cut an extra 30,000 jobs to make the situation facing Home Affairs, education, correctional services, police, army. You can name every aspect of government. There's understaffing, and and the state's capacity to provide the basic services to our people is continuously declining year by year. I mean, how do you then, in the middle of all of that, say we will cut another 30,000 jobs in the public service? Totally irresponsible statement.
So how do you then respond to the government's argument that the plan is necessary to reduce the public sector wage bill and to achieve fiscal sustainability?
We have said that our wage bill is unmanageable in the first place. Government is pointing at the direction of the ordinary public service, but three fingers are pointing at the government chest. We now have a massive and unaffordable, at least in terms of our economic strength, a cabinet size that we cannot afford. That's the correct way of putting it. We cannot afford, in a country with 43% unemployment, that has become the most unequal society in the world, that have levels of poverty now reaching 2/3 of the population. Then to have a cabinet of 43 cabinet deputy ministers and massive other numbers of ministers themselves. It is to have 32 ministers, 43 cabinet ministers is where the problem is. We are, if we're talking about overbloating, the overbloating is at the cabinet level. The people who are overpaid are the presidents, the ministers. If you compare their salaries with the first world political leaders, you will see that ours are being paid at a very, very high level. Same with the director generals that have negotiated themselves out of the public service central bargaining chamber. They are being rewarded at a very high scale. They are multimillionaires. They should be speaking about the multimillionaires. And when they're talking about a wage bill that is unaffordable, not the ordinary workers who are sweeping the hospitals and make them clean. We are making sure that the police stations are functional, the schools are functional, and they have some basic security, and they are cleaned, and they have proper facilities for our kids to play, because the grass must be cut at the end of the day. These are the critical skills. I don't know what the minister says or talking about when he says we are going to safeguard and make sure that we don't lose scarce skills in the public service. The reality is that once you open the window of the early retirement, you are opening a window for the most skilled individuals who are by nature mobile to leave the public service. And what you will be settled with are those that are not mobile, and because they do not have the skills level to be able to get jobs elsewhere.
So what's the plan? How will SAFTU engage with the government and other stakeholders to address concerns around the early retirement plan and to find a more equitable solution?
Of course, we are engaging the government together with other unions in the PSCPC to tell them that their plan will not work for a country that wants to be seen as a developing country. What we need, Masichaba, and this is what we have been trying to advocate, some of us, for the past 3 decades. We need a truly developmental state, a capable state, a state that can crowd in private investment into the public infrastructure, a state that can rally the society as a whole behind the need to ensure that our schools have adequate numbers of educators, they have proper security, laboratories, libraries, a state that can ensure that our correctional services centers are correctional services in the true sense of the word, a state that can ensure that it have a capacity to protect us against our enemies, foreign enemies, through an efficient, well-equipped defense force, a state that can protect us from the criminality, acts of criminality in our streets. We should be one of the very few countries that allow so many people to be killed in our streets because we just don't have numbers. How many times have you ever heard, Masichaba, rural people and township residents telling us that they are being told that there are no vans to come rescue them from these bandits who are roaming our streets, raping their children and their wives. And how many times have you been told that there is no van in the police station to come over? How many times have you heard the police unions themselves saying that the capacity in the police services is being undermined by, in the main, the lack of numbers? One study that I saw said that we have lost 50% of ability to just identify murders between 2012 and 2022, 50% capacity gone. Women know in South Africa, if you get raped, there's an only 11% chance that your alleged rapist will be convicted in our courts. Our courts are in dire straits. Every Chief Justice have pointed out the need to beef up the infrastructure in our courts, to employ more prosecutors, to train them, to train more intelligence operators, and instead of using their monies for corrupt activities of the state. That's what we need, a developmental state, and we need our own version of a Marshall Plan. We need to go back to the demands of the Freedom Charter, and in particular the economic demands of the Freedom Charter that are centered around the demand that all the wealth of this country shall be shared amongst all the people of our country.
So are there any potential consequences or actions that SAFTU may take if the government goes ahead with implementing the early retirement plan despite the union's objections?
We are saying to the government, the 11 billion rands you are setting aside to facilitate this early retirement must be diverted to employing more police officials, to employ more army, and to employ more nurses, dentists, psychiatrists in the public hospitals. And if the government is refusing to listen to our pleas, we'll be left with no option but to mobilize the rest of the trade union movement and the working class formations of our country to protest and to bring to the attention of our people, whether they are rich or poor, that the government's action are only centered around strengthening the arm of the private sector, the corporates, who government have cut their taxes from their peak at 52% in 1993 to 27%, which government is now allowing to move 1.1 trillion rands every year through illicit cash outflows. There is money in South Africa, Masichaba. The problem is that we don't have a government that has a political will to stop illicit cash outflows, mispricing that amount to 1.1 trillion rands. We don't have a government that has a will to tax and to spread the tax burden accordingly to the people's ability to pay the taxes. Instead, every time there is a crisis in the country, government always look at the direction of the poor to increase the VAT, which everybody knows is a regressive tax system that punishes more the poor instead of the rich in our society.
So, Mr. Vavi, what is the timeline for SAFTU's campaign against this early retirement plan, and what are your key milestones and targets?
We are in a negotiations as we speak with the government. There's a dispute. Government is offering a meager 4.7% in salary wages, and that there's a dispute there that may lead into a strike. Government cannot ignore that the food prices in South Africa are still hovering around 15%, and that generally the inflation on the working class is always 6% more than the national average. So we're talking about an inflation of about 10, 11% as it impacts on the working class in our country. We're going to declare a dispute. Hopefully there will be a political will amongst all the public sector unions to fight together. So we're looking at the strike combining the need to reject these 30,000 job losses in the public service and the need to increase the wages of workers so that they can cope with the escalating cost of living. We were in Durban on Friday, SAFTU, making a plea with NERSA not to allow Eskom to increase the electricity prices by 36% in the coming year. All of those things need a united working class, and we can only hope that we are going to leave behind all of the squabbles of the syndrome of develop this idea first, and we want to compete with one another instead of combining our efforts as the progressive forces of this country to fight together. So we're looking at having something major by the time that the minister finalizes and concretizing this idea when he read his budget. I think it's on the 24th of February next year. We will have a demonstration, a massive demonstration to protest this in South Africa.
All right, before I let you go, and very briefly, are there any existing labor laws or regulations that SAFTU believes need to be strengthened in order to better protect workers' rights?
Well, even there we are under attack. You know, government is trying to steamroll us into accepting totally anti-worker pieces of legislation to amend the overall progressive basic conditions of employment, Labor Relations Act, and other pieces of legislation, once again to respond to the pressures of the corporates, of the rating agencies, and the IMF and the World Bank, and not to the pleas of the workers in the informal sector and the unemployed for more protections from the state. Even there, we are planning to have a major strike next year to protest the current amendments that the government is trying to ram down our throats at NEDLAC and in Parliament.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Masha.
That was South African Federation of Trade Unions General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi.